Welcome to the 23rd CRC Roundtable, a monthly virtual seminar series. Our intention is to host targeted, inclusive, and informed conversations that match scientific advances and management needs. The webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption, so each seminar invites a diverse range of researchers, managers, and other professionals to have conversations around critical topics. The point of this is to build connectivity between all of us and to increase our collective competency for decision making. As a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to provide introductory remarks, allowing a full 30 minutes of discussion. This is all about us, the collective us, giving us a place to ask clumsy questions and to practice the bravery and humility necessary for building the future we want. Please type your name, organization, and location into the chat box so we can see everyone who's attending our community today for the panel discussion. We also ask that you stay muted with your camera off while the speakers are presenting. And I'll follow Denise's lead by answering why this topic, why now, and why these speakers. We're seeing some of the hottest temperatures around the country and the globe right now. I have a sister in Austin, Texas, where the power grid is struggling under the heat and strain of so many people trying to stay cool in AC in their homes. The UK also announced it's a national emergency this week after issuing their first ever red extreme heat warning, which is the highest warning in their system. Hot weather is somewhat expected in the summer, but climate change has been increasing the instances of extreme heat. And on top of this, the rise in global temperatures, there are conditions within some communities that lead to elevated temperatures and impacts to human health and infrastructure. Heat islands is what we're here to talk about today. They are areas that are significantly warmer than their surroundings, generally due to human activities. The primary cause of hotter temperatures are structures such as buildings, roads, parking lots that are absorbing and re-emitting the sun's heat more than a landscape with greenery. And then energy generation can add still more heat if we've got AC running or buildings like industry buildings that are adding heat to the environment. Populations that are especially vulnerable to the temperatures within urban heat islands include outdoor workers, elderly, children, and low-income households. So our speakers today represent two perspectives on urban heat islands. Jeremy Hoffman, a scientist with the Science Museum of Virginia in Richmond, is very well known regionally for focusing attention on redlining and heat islands and the benefits of adding tree cover. He developed a story map called Throwing Shade in RVA that has been nationally recognized for drawing attention to historical redlining's ongoing legacy of injustice. And our second speaker today is Peggy Van Uris. She is a passionate environmentalist from a family of tree champions who works with Relief Seaville and the Charlottesville Tree Commission. She has been working in her community to educate, advocate, and encourage behavior change. Speakers, I will try to gracefully let you know if we bump up against time because we do like to guard that 30 minutes for discussion. If you have material that you are not able to share during the time limit, we'll find a way to make that information available to others afterwards. Attendees, if we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we will give the speakers time to address them afterwards and then share their answers back to this community. With that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Jeremy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Reporting to you live from 93-degree air temperature, almost 100-degree feels like temperature Richmond this afternoon. I'm going to quickly go over kind of the in a slight bit more detail than Lauren just served up, the kind of the situation at hand with climate change and urban heat islands, and then basically try as hard as I can to go through its connection to environmental justice issues, both in Richmond and around the country, and then end with a transitional period where I talk about actually how do we plan for being more prepared for urban heat, specifically in the face of climate change in cities. Now, I'm going to use the word cities, but recognize that cities have a very non-distinct geographical definition, and regardless of the size of the place where you live, if it is a human settlement, there is a measurable and detectable urban heat island effect where you live. So it might sound like I'm talking about the big city, but it's not actually just big cities. It is a variety of different sizes of cities can have this same kind of effect. So I'm going to switch my screen over and share my kind of funny first slide here, the title being Throwing Shade on Climate Change. But I need to acknowledge, the Science Museum of Virginia. I've been able to be here for about 6 years, as well as serving on affiliate faculty position at VCU and working as the chapter lead for the 5th National Climate Assessment Southeast chapter, which is due out in fall of 2023. Speaking of national climate assessments, the global climate change has its own kind of particular expression at the local level here in Virginia across the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Generally, all can be boiled down to 5 emojis like this. And we'll talk today, as I mentioned, about kind of the hotter expectation of climate change. But really fast, it's not just the heat, it's also the precipitation and sea level change, heavier rain events getting heavier, causing more urban floods, as well as rising sea levels permanently inundating parts of our coastline. And depending on how quickly that happens, will displace tons of communities, requiring our really measured and quick response to that threat. But also there's some interesting ones, the sneezier and wheezier, in the sense of a longer and stronger pollen season and far traveled wildfire smoke from the western wildfires here in North America actually degraded our air quality last summer. But also locally prescribed burns are becoming harder and harder to manage in the Southeast. So we actually have some wheezier days because of local and regional planned management fires. All of that stuff is expected to continue to worsen the longer we delay action on climate change to restrict the amount of total global warming that we see. But let's talk about heat. As Lauren mentioned, it's one of the key stressors in the summertime. Any day over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, there's a significant increase in the hospitalizations regionally. But it's the deadliest weather-related hazard in the United States. We learned in Chicago in 1995, and then in Portland last summer. Primarily elderly members of communities of color are disproportionately impacted by those stressors. But really, it can affect anyone at any time who is exerting themselves or is disproportionately exposed to those conditions. If you want to read about how sociology and kind of social determinants of health play into this picture, I highly recommend Eric Kleinenberg's book, Heat Wave, where he dissects the social background of the Chicago heat wave in 1995, which hasn't changed at all in any city fundamentally anywhere. Now, we know heat doesn't treat every single place the same way, as well, as Lauren mentioned. If we take a look at this picture, which is a parking lot, could be just about anywhere, but it's out of the window of my office at the Science Museum of Virginia, and take a thermal photo of that landscape, we can see that the human-built surfaces, asphalts, are much warmer than the natural landscapes like trees and native plants. And then there's a whole wide range of different heat signatures here, based on the color and density of those different surfaces and materials. I can talk for an hour about this one picture. We can come back to it later if we'd like, but to continue going on, in 2017, 5 years ago, almost exactly, we measured the city's temperatures using air temperature thermometers hanging out of windows paired with GPS units. We found a 16-degree Fahrenheit difference between the warmest and coolest place within Richmond at the exact same time during a heat wave. These places tended to be those with lower tree canopy, wider streets, smaller buildings, and as we'll find out a little bit later, a history of marginalization for the residents that live there. But we know that these hotter areas disproportionately experience higher rates of heat illnesses. This is a study that we're doing in collaboration with the Richmond Ambulance Authority, showing that where we have the hottest places in the city, correspond to those areas that have higher rates of heat-related illnesses responded to by the Richmond ambulance. Even when we correct for population density, this pattern remains. Now, this becomes very clearly an environmental justice issue when we look at just who is being responded to by the ambulance, where the blue bars here indicate the percentage of all the total heat-related illness cases versus the bar in red, the percentage of that group as part of the Richmond population. And what we can see is that the Black residents of our city see an the overwhelming majority of the cases for heat-related illnesses responded to by the ambulance, but they only make up an equivalent amount, about 50-50. Population here in Richmond between Black and white residents. This clearly points to a environmental justice issue that we were able to link to a history of residential segregation in the form of what was known as redlining, or the systematic denial of real estate investment to particular neighborhoods based on the color of the skin and immigrant status of the people living in that neighborhood, and not at all about their ability to manage or accept real estate investment. And so we were able to show in this article from New York Times, which was citing a 2020 paper that we published in January 2020, that formerly redlined areas, or these predominantly and historically Black communities, are significantly warmer in the present day than their non-redlined or privileged counterparts, places like Windsor Farms and Westover Hills, specifically in the city of Richmond. These areas are not only warmer, but they see more of those paved over surfaces, those ones that we saw in that picture, driving the hotter surface temperatures, as well as having many fewer trees. And when we zoom out across the entirety of the United States, looking at all 250 cities that were redlined, 94% of those cities exhibit the exact same patterns. This doesn't hold only for the cities that were redlined. A follow-up paper in 2021 from Suzanne Benz established that in 76% of all counties in the United States, there is a racial and economic component to exposure to extreme heat. And so just because your city wasn't redlined doesn't mean that there isn't this pattern going on. And I know that was a triple negative, but basically heat everywhere disproportionately expose members of communities of color and poorer individuals. Now, we learned some additional things about these patterns in that not only are there fewer trees, but they're smaller in formerly redlined areas than their formerly non-redlined counterparts. That's an interesting forestry related and ecosystem services conversation that we can continue as well. But as we've found other sorts of data sets to look into about the threats of climate change, flood factor scores, which show areas that are disproportionately exposed to flooding threats within FEMA boundaries, show that formerly redlined areas disproportionately experience a high flood risk. This was also picked up by Redfin, the millennial portal into dreaming about homeownership. But also a paper just recently came out showing that these areas have higher amounts of air pollution, key air pollution components to the EPA's air quality index. So already these neighborhoods are experiencing a hotter, wetter, sneezier, and wheezier climate. And so adding on top of that, the threat of climate change just further places these neighborhoods into a heightened state of precarity. So what are our options? This really great report, Planning for Urban Heat Resilience, from Lad Keith and Sarah Merow, explained that there's several types of ways for us to think about solutions to urban heat, from mitigation, meaning actually reducing the built environment's contribution to urban heat, as well as preparing and responding to acute heat risks. These break down into a variety of different solution possibilities. On the mitigation side, things like managing waste heat, greening, design, and land use, and management on the side of reacting to it, from energy, exposure, public health, and preparedness. And so when we look at what these things might look like in practice in a community, up on top, we have the shade structures and shade incorporated into all urban designs. We see greening in the form of green walls, parks, water features. And then on the side of heat management, we have resilience hubs. We have solar energy that provides off the grid types of consistent resources for people to be able to cool down. We have systematic education campaigns about extreme heat information and how that reacts in multiple different languages and culturally relevant different types of resources, as well as clear and consistent warning signs and warning systems for the public to be reacting to extreme heat. And so what's really exciting is that you're going to hear from Peggy now, who is going to tell you about how Charlottesville has been taking this information and applying it directly to the urban heat threat in Charlottesville, one of the key cities in Virginia to kind of set the tone for the rest. So here's my email, find me on social media, and I'll pass it over to Peggy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let me unmute myself here. Thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to share my screen, see if that works. Where is my screen? Excuse me. All right. I think let's see if that'll work again. Sorry. You are sharing your screen. Wait a minute.
We can see part of it, but maybe if you go into slideshow mode, we'll be able to see.
Yeah, if I can pull it over here. Sorry.
It's okay.
Jeremy's much more technologically. Here we go. And I think I'm not at the right place. So let me escape, go back to the beginning. Here we go. All right, thank you. So thank you for having me today. As Lauren said, I am chair of the Charlottesville Tree Commission, and that is a body that's appointed by the government. And we advise the government and staff on all things related to trees, planting, preserving, and removing. And Lauren asked me, well, how did you get this other organization, Relief Seville, started? And I said, one word, it's Jeremy. Because for the last couple of years, the Tree Commission has really been following Jeremy's lead in scientific research on heat islands and the relationship between trees and heat. So about a year ago, the Tree Commission initiated this organization, which I'm also chair of, called Relief Seville. And we did it for a couple other reasons besides Jeremy. One, we've noticed that the tree canopy in Charlottesville is drastically declining. We had a tree canopy study that took data up to 2018. And we know from 2004, when we started tracking this, to 2018, our canopy has declined 10%. You can see that circle there. It represents the number of acres of trees, 660 on your left there. What was more disturbing, that we found the 10 years between 2004 and 2014, the canopy declined 5% from 50 to 45. But yet in just the 4 years between 2014 and 2018, it declined another 5%. So in other words, the decline is doubling. So we can project on the right side that today in 2022, that our canopy probably is around 35%, it's declined 15%. And you can see that represents 990 acres, which is huge. And this is projected on the map of Charlottesville. Another reason, and again, thanks to Jeremy, when we did our canopy study, we looked at the percentage of tree cover in all our neighborhoods. We have 19 neighborhoods. Out of 19, 12 are below 40%. 40% is the minimum we'd like to be. We'd like to be up to 50%. And Richmond has a goal of 60%. So we're still behind Richmond. But anyway, out of those neighborhoods, 7 of them are below 30%. And you can see we have 2 in the red part of the city below 20%. So another reason that we started Relief is that we found out from our canopy study that 75% of the land in Charlottesville for new trees is all on private property. The city plants land on public trees, but not on private trees. So this is where we come in. Now, I'm going to take you through a little bit. All of you know this. I'm preaching to the choir, I know. But why are trees important? But I'm just going to show you that as we talk to these neighborhoods, particularly the heat island neighborhoods, of why trees are valuable, we really try to use practical reason and hit them in the heart and the pocketbook. So just quickly, I'll go through them. We know that trees lower air conditioning bills. up to 25%. We know that trees reduce heat mortality, that's Jeremy's studying, with only 10% more tree coverage. We know that street trees reduce air pollution, sometimes more than 50%. Trees are one of our greatest defenses against climate change and all the consequences of that. So we started Relief Seaville. So we make a big fat claim. We say trees save lives, and it's our mission to protect the health and well-being of our neighborhoods, particularly those with low tree cover from the rising heat of climate change. Now, why am I chairman of these two? Well, as Lauren said, first of all, I married into a family of tree lovers. Van Yar's Tree Company has been in business for over 100 years in Charlottesville. My father-in-law ran it, his father ran it, my husband ran it, and now I have 2 children, believe it or not, who are carrying on the tree company. Also, I started off after college as a teacher, then I became a landscape architect. And so my 2 passions are education and the environment. I serve on a lot of committees and boards over the years on those 2 subjects. And what's neat about Relief is that it combines my 2 passions. So that's why I'm here. So how are we going to meet our mission? Really 3 ways. We're going to plant trees, again, particularly in those neighborhoods that have few. We're going to preserve trees. We're going to start a fund to preserve existing trees, because we know that existing trees will make our neighborhoods healthier and combat climate change much more than having to wait 30 or 20 years for little trees to grow. And the third thing we're doing is education. We're doing a lot of education, particularly of teenagers and young kids. And who are we? We're a partnership. The Tree Commission initiated us. The Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy has started our funding. We're also partners with the Charlottesville Area Tree Stewards and a local nonprofit called the City of Promise, which works in our first target neighborhood. And they work with families and kids to make them healthier and stronger. So this is our target neighborhood. It's called 10th and Page. It was one of those red line communities that Jeremy talked about. It's centrally located between, on the right of your screen, the downtown Charlottesville, on your left, the University of Virginia. It has about 11,000, it's a very dense community, about 11,000 people on 83 acres, has about 430 structures. Half of those were built before 1930. Now the facts, why are we there? It has one of the lowest tree canopy coverage in the city, 18%. We know from the data that our local fire department has collected that it has the highest rate of heart attacks in the city, has the second highest rate of asthma. We also know it has the highest energy costs in the city. More than half of the families there spend 10% or more on their income on energy cost. The average in the city is just 2%. So that can be, the average in the city may spend $80. The homes here could spend up to $400. And that's why we're targeting this neighborhood. Now, just to give you a little history of 10th and Page, I can't talk about that without talking about this man named John West. He lived between 1850 to 1927. He was a slave, but then after the Civil War, he was emancipated. It's been said that his owner, who was also a black person, but a freed black person, adopted him. And when she died, her name was Jane West, she left her properties to them. So with those properties and his money from being a barber, he started buying land in 10th and Page and selling it to Black families. By the time he died in 1927, he owned hundreds of acres, not just in 10th and Page, but in Albemarle County and Augusta County. The land in Augusta County was taken up into the Shenandoah National Park. So thanks to him and many others that followed him, 10th and Page has remained mostly an African-American community. I can't talk about 10th and Page without talking about a scar that happened in Charlottesville in the 60s. Just like many other places, the powers to be decided to tear down Vinegar Hill, a successful Black community, because they wanted more land for economic development. So you can see over 20 acres completely wiped off the face of the map. Structures, trees, and everything. the families there, about 160 were moved into 10th and Page into a project, public housing called West Haven, named after John West. So what we're doing first, this is relief. We are making presentations to elementary schools. Why are trees important to you? We're doing activities on the playground. This is the elementary school in 10th and Page. On the same day last September, we took the measurement of their 2 playgrounds. One's in the shade with the blue thermometer. The temperature was 82 degrees. The one on the left, the red thermometer, was 102 degrees. So this kind of facts really comes home to kids and families. We're really trying to reach teenagers. This around Arbor Day, we had at the high school, we had an environmental career day. We had over 30 vendors from tree care companies to landscape installers to the Nature Conservancy to landscape architects, civil engineers, showing kids, and we had 250 kids come, showing them there are all kinds of careers. Some you need a college degree, some you don't even really need a high school degree. So we wanted to show them that opportunity. This summer, we've got the Green Team. This again, it's a group of about 12 teenagers. Half of them live in the 10th and Page area. We're teaching them about trees and the environment and about climate change. And then later in the fall, they will knock on doors with us and they neighbors in 10th and Page and convince them to plant a tree, we hope. And we hope a big tree, Jeremy. They'll be giving out literatures. We're also working with a climate organization here, C3s. So they'll be giving out literature about how people can get money for free and make their home more energy efficient. We're doing other tree plantings. This was on Arbor Day. We dedicated a tree at another elementary school and taught kids all kinds of interesting facts. That's our urban forester there about trees. We appear at events. There are other people in my family involved in this. That's my granddaughter, Nora. And she was putting tattoos on kids that are at this fair. So we asked them questions about trees. The answers are right in front of their face on the panel there. We give out literature to families. So we're doing all kinds of things to relieve Seaville. We hope everybody will join us. And that's our new website. Love to have you visit. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, both Jeremy and Peggy, for sharing your expertise with us. We now welcome questions from attendees. You can enter your questions into the chat box. But to get the conversation started, I have a question that we briefly discussed when we were planning the webinar. Can you share your perspective on the opinion that wanting to plant and preserve trees is not compatible with wanting new affordable housing? Either of you can start, whoever would like to.
Well, I can start because we had a real practical experience with that. There's a public housing that's being renovated in downtown Charlottesville. And the tree commission sort of being, are we elitist and do we not care about public housing or affordable housing there? And being a landscape architect, I always say, it's not either or. If you just plan from the beginning, what's important, the environment's important. People need to have affordable housing, but they need to have a livable environment, a healthy environment. So if you plan from the beginning, you can have both. And what happened in this instant at the public housing is that we got in late, I'm afraid, the tree commission, trying to save some of the trees that were surrounding these beautiful 45-year-old oak trees. So they started taking them down. And we were accused actually by a city council member that, they said the people didn't care about the trees. Well, the assistant city manager popped up and said, Peggy, that's not true. The people who planned the renovation never even asked the people about the trees because the trees were really outside their property on the tree lawns, between the sidewalk and the curb. So, if it's just planned together, we can have affordable housing and healthy environment. So, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think unfortunately as with most of our issues around housing can be traced back to, this all goes to a policy that every city in every corner of the United States has on record, which is known as their zoning code. And within zoning codes, they tell you what you can build and where. And unfortunately, it hasn't happened yet that policies have made it mandatory to provide, maintain, or preserve open public green space as part of new development. So if you see housing going up in your cities in the present day, you see probably only two types. One of them is the kind of high rise 5/1 kind of mixed use building that we see across Richmond. I know several of them have gone up in Charlottesville, which have no mandated green factor to their construction. So most of the time, if they do provide streetscaping, it's the minimum as required by city guidelines, design guidelines. It doesn't come unless it is a very innovative approach to housing, which hasn't really happened in Richmond yet, with including things like a green roof or green walls. Those are all things, those sorts of green investments or preservation of existing green infrastructure benefits, like things like mature trees, as you mentioned. There's a new project being kind of developed for one of our hottest neighborhoods, Scott's Addition, that has 3 mature oak trees that are probably 65 years old. Magnificent. And they actually cool down that block relative to all the other ones around them by like 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit during a heat wave. So it's natural air conditioning in our hottest neighborhood. And so actually, we're in the process of trying to secure those trees to not be demolished alongside the demolition of the existing structures. But unless that is put into your zoning code, literally it is what builders can and cannot do. It is the law of the land. And it literally is, that's what it is. It's like law of land use is what zoning is. We're not going to be able to get both of those things at the same time, or at least we're going to continue to see them as oppositional when actually they can be 100% done at the exact same time. We need to be focusing on where the screws and bolts are that we can be turning to make sure that those things are part of our new housing, so that people, and actually there's this really interesting paper. I actually dug this up to be able to talk about it. Where is that? Boston. But anyway, I'll come back to that. I don't want to waste time with me just kind of being like, so I'll stop there and let some other folks ask questions. I'll come back to what I was going to say.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, we have a question for Peggy in the chat. Do you know what the reasons are for why trees are declining in your area?
Oh, that's a good question. Sorry. Development, as Jeremy talked about. And I meant to say that slide with Vinegar Hill, which wiped out 20 acres of trees and buildings. But it's basically, we can tie it to development that's happening, and it's happening very rapidly in Charlottesville. And just like Richmond, they're desirable communities. People want to live here. They want to move back to the city. And we have a proposal just coming up at our next tree commission meeting. It's a proposal coming to the city council, but we're looking into it in what's called Fry Springs, where it's a neighborhood of small homes, where the developer wants to take down 8 acres of beautiful oak hickory forest, and a stream going through it, fill it 40 feet and build single family homes. And the only way we can stop it, because he needs a critical slope waiver. I'm afraid people don't think that forests are critical, and that's something maybe we can change over time, Jeremy. But that's the only way we can stop it, if they do not allow this critical slope. Thank goodness it's not affordable housing, because everybody's bending back over for affordable housing, which is a good thing. It's single family homes, so we may have a chance. So it's development mainly.
Thank you.
So I have that thing open. Let me just show you where
Perfect.
this. So I found a paper that I think really does this good job of showing, juxtaposing housing density with tree canopy density. And you might find these answers surprising. This was a survey done for like around 1,000 Boston residents, which, you know, in a variety of different contexts in Boston. And basically being able to rate their preference for a particular balance of housing density and tree canopy density. And you might be surprised, but they used a whole 16 different scenes, I want to say, of different types of these combinations. And what's really surprising is what comes out as the most popular options. So this is a paper called Perceptions of Urban Housing Density and Tree Canopy in Boston, Massachusetts. But what we're looking at here is building density along the x-axis from low to high, and low meaning the kind of density of people. So single family homes are in the bottom left quadrant, and then all the way to super high rise, you know, ultra dense kinds of housing types. And then up on the y-axis is tree canopy density. So this is the amount of tree canopy that's visible from the ground level. And there are 6 symbols on here. The half of a Ghostbusters logo are the bottom 3 ranked scenes. So what we can see here is, you know, denser buildings juxtaposed against almost none, if very meager amounts of tree canopy, received the lowest ratings along what's known as a Likert scale, describing from supporting it not at all to liking it very much. And then up on this tree canopy density, the 3 stars are the scenes that receive the highest rankings on this Likert scale. And so you can see, even when there is mid to even high amounts of housing density, preference is higher on more density if there's more tree canopy. So these are, you know, brownstone multifamily houses. This is a maybe 6 or 7 floor kind of building. And so it seems like preferences among these different housing types and tree canopies, people will support higher amounts of density, which is exactly what is required from our housing crisis and climate crisis. Remember that housing action is climate action, that by pairing these 2 things together, we can actually achieve both our tree canopy kinds of goals as well as our housing goals. So it's a really interesting paper. I'll actually post the website for how to access this paper in the chat.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. We've got a few questions in the chat about basically how to get to that point where we have nice trees in our communities. So this question's for both Jeremy and Peggy. For any urban tree planting initiatives that you do have data on, what is the success rate for newly planted tree survival? And what techniques have organizations used within communities to help nurture new plantings until they're established? And are municipal departments helping?
Jeremy, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I've seen urban tree planting initiatives across the country, and the key indicator of success rate is first 2 years watering during the warm season. If those trees are not watered, they're not going to survive. Urban environments are exceptionally difficult to thrive in to begin with, especially for more native species to regions of the United States, since urban environments are so different than the natural environment that they would have grown up in otherwise. Now, there are some non-native species that you can choose that are heat and drought resistant. You know, the London plane tree has been used in cities all over the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. New York's London plane trees, for example, are some of the most successful urban canopies in the country, but they are no longer allowed to plant those since they are non-native. But basically the success rate depends entirely on how much attention they get in their first 2 years. So typically you can imagine anywhere between, here in Richmond, our success rate when we've had really high levels of community engagement around watering successful contracting with watering groups, we're up in the 80, 90, 95% success rate. So these things are surviving and thriving when they're taken care of. If they're not taken care of, we see, maybe as low as 40% to 60% survival. So we're losing up to half of the trees that we plant if you're just putting very young stick-like trees into a lawn that's not going to get watered. Very few of those are going to survive. So Beth, it's very dependent on the background care that is available for these trees, and the municipal department involvement is a city by city context. Here in Richmond, our urban forestry division has been severely underfunded. For many years, our urban tree commission has been defunct. For many years, we were successful in gaining a line item in this year's budget to hire a new urban forester, and it's becoming clear actually that that is in jeopardy, instead aiming to hire more, potentially just more tree crews through contract basis, instead of actually hiring a forester dedicated to maintaining the urban forest in Richmond. So depending on what city you're in, you might have a much more involved department in the form of like tree care. But it's kind of a mixed bag, and ultimately how much effort you put into maintaining those new plantings directly results in their success. Peggy?
Yeah. First, I'd just like to respond to something Jeremy said. It drives me crazy when people say you have to plant all natives in the city. First of all, the city does not have native soil, nor do they have the natural environment of a forest. So we want to plant hardy trees. London planes have been planted in cities since the 1800s or before. That's in London. That's why they're called London planes. You can't put a tulip poplar in the middle of downtown New York on the streets. Trees that are going to survive are like willow oaks, London planes. And why? Because in nature, they grow where it's wet, where the soil doesn't have much oxygen. And that's why they survive in the city. So let's talk about hardy trees. As much as I love natives, and I push natives as much as I can, you can't put necessarily native trees on unnative soil. So anyway, that's my rant. So of course, the city plants trees every year, and they water or try to water. It's been hard this year because the park staff is down. What we're going to do is we have the homeowner sign an agreement that they will water the tree for 2 years. We sort of monitor that. We give them either gator bags, or we're going to try out a new product that's actually was discovered, and you can buy it in Richmond, called the tree diaper, which is a strange name. Thank you, Jeremy.
They do super well here at the, we're testing them here at the museum.
Yeah, I hope the urban forester, I think, is on this call. I hope he'll listen. Anyway, they're made up of the same materials as diapers, and it looks like a black donut. It goes underneath the mulch. It fills up with water from the rain, then lets it slowly evaporates, go into the soil, so you don't have to water so much. But if we used gator bags, we'll give people buckets. And the other thing, so water is very important, as Jeremy said. The other thing, Van Yerry's Tree Company, I'm twisting their arms for the next 3 years. They're going to go in and do formative plant pruning on these young trees. Lots of trees that come out of the nurseries need pruning, so that we can at least get the tree off with a healthy structure, because that's often happened. Trees break down. So that's how we're going to try to make sure these trees survive.
Great, thank you. Another question that's somewhat related, so we're talking about survival rates. Is it possible or feasible to plant more mature trees in order to gain a more immediate benefit, and maybe bypass, some of the having to care for it until it's, a little hardier?
Peggy, you probably know this.
Yeah. Well, the reality is planting large trees, let's say 4 to 6 inch caliber, that's the diameter, they struggle. They really struggle if you plant them. I mean, planting trees 2 inches and below have a much more survival rate because they can adjust to their new place. It's really, I know in major development, sometime even the downtown mall, when it was first done, you know, those big oaks, I think they were planted, they were at least 6 inch. But they, you know, have I think a sophisticated irrigation system and whatnot. But the average homeowner, really, you don't want to plant anything more than 2 to 2.5 inch. We plant smaller trees in our neighborhoods because we're going to have volunteers. And even a 2 inch tree has a big root ball, and you need professionals to plant that. So it's smaller trees will acclimate faster and grow faster than a bigger tree. Now I'm talking about the size of the tree, not a shade tree versus an ornamental. I'm talking about what's normally called the caliber, the diameter of the tree when it's planted. So smaller trees do better in the long run, smaller size planted.
Okay, that sounds good. Quick question that's not in the chat, but I'm just wondering as a follow-up. How do you kind of manage expectations when you are putting in a smaller tree and it might be a little while before you're seeing, you know, huge temperature differences because you've planted that tree?
One really innovative way that I've seen this done is through this group called Reforest Richmond. And here is, this is their neighborhood outreach toolkit. And so what it does is shows and explains, you know, what the tree is going to look like in relation to a, let me share my screen. It's actually really beautiful, beautifully done artwork, showing here like what the tree will look like in 10 years in relation to a one-story home and what it'll look like in 40 years. And so these things are actually printoutable and do really amazing things for locally native trees that do well even in somewhat in urban environments. And so they actually used this to very high community engagement along a corridor in city of Richmond's north side that has very low tree canopy. But you can see they have very very beautiful representations of the data, as well as a send it back kind of strategy of, I would like this one. So plant this in my front yard in the street tree well. And so I highly recommend, if you're trying to do that kind of community-based informed planting, that using those illustrations have been really, really nice. It's like, you're going to get a thing that's this big, but in 10 years, it'll be up to your first floor. In 20 years or 40 years, it's going to be twice the size of your house.
So we're preparing, we're working with our green team teenagers tomorrow. We're going to do some role playing about what do you say to people when they open the door. We're hoping our teenagers when we go in the 10th and Page neighborhood, are going to make it so people will open the door instead of an old white lady like me coming. We're preparing them to answer objections. And I don't know, a lot of people are afraid of trees. They may be glad, they may want them to stay little. We may have a hard time convincing them to do shade trees. But anyway, we're looking at objections. We're going to teach them, how do you meet objections? So someone says, I'm afraid of trees. I'm afraid it might kill me. Well, the answer to that is, do you know that how many people are killed by cars a year? Well, the answer is about 37,000. How many people are killed by trees a year in the United States? The answer is 100. Most of those are tree workers that do stupid things in the trees. So what about leaves? I don't want to rake leaves. Well, actually, you know that leaves are beneficial for the soil. So just leave them on the ground as you mow. You'll scrunch them up and they'll improve your soil. So anyway, we're going through that. Those are beautiful illustrations, and we're developing our own, Jeremy. So I'll definitely want to get a hold of that, that's gorgeous. You know, to show people what kind of tree they can choose and what are the benefits, and showing those kinds of illustrations. Great.
Yeah, those are freely available. You can download them actually on the Reforest Richmond website.
Great.
So, you know, if you want to use those species, you know, even those are the ones that are recommended by the Richmond forester, the Janine Lester. So that was like kind of using what Richmond was going to use, and on, you know, in Richmond tree wells. So it's freely available, downloadable. You can use it.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that resource. All right, so we have a question from Mary Bennett. What are your strategies for increasing canopy cover in residential areas that have limited space or safe distance from homes and utilities?
Well, I can jump in. Yeah, our target neighborhood 10th and Page does have small yards. They're small homes, small yards. You can still have trees though, you know, big trees, little trees. You know, we'll have to look at each yard. My father-in-law, Mitch Van Yeris, who owned the tree company, he always said, you know, it's better to have a big tree planted close to your house, because if it falls, it doesn't get up much momentum at all before it hits your house. It might dent your gutters, but that's it. Now, if it's 50 feet away and it falls, oh, you might be in trouble because it's going to get up a lot of momentum with all that weight. So that's one way we can convince people, you know, it's not so bad to have trees next to your house, close to your house. It's going to shade them and whatnot. But I remember too, you know, Tree Fredericksburg, Ann Little, I'm sure a lot of you know her. She's just a dynamo. And she said, Peggy, if you can't convince them to plant a big tree, plant a small tree. You want them to just love trees, you know? So, you know, if they don't want a big tree, give them a tree. Any tree.
And I would say it's like thinking about innovative ways to find or even create new plantable space. So, you know, one of the innovative things that we've started to do here in Richmond is to work on what are known as depaving projects. And so this is a straight stretch of road in the Westover Hills neighborhood, which is just south of the river of the James River in Richmond. And this little stretch is adjacent to a Dollar General near a very like kind of you know, urban neighborhood center. And our parks and recreation group have really taken on the idea of, well, if there's no plantable space along this public right of way, we need to create it. And so this a 4-foot by 60-foot strip of this sidewalk will be depaved, broken up. The soil will be remediated, and there will be new trees, both overstory and understory trees, planted on this stretch of street using funds from the Department of Forestry. It seems like we're going to be able to do that. So in some places, you need to be creative about understanding what real public space is and what we value being on that space. So if it's all paved over, maybe thinking about, in some cities in Italy, they've depaved half parking spots to become plantable tree wells. Are we willing to balance our obsession with car culture with our need for urban forests? You know, those are the sorts of hard questions that we're going to need to have with our neighbors and our communities in order to create new and innovative places to plant trees or establish new green spaces.
Great. I think we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. So we've got someone who's interested in setting up a heat island monitoring plan and was wondering on suggestions how to start doing something like that. What would be involved? How costly will it be? Any advice?
Yeah, I mean, so there are very, very low cost ways to do it in using freely available tool sets that are out there. The Trust for Public Land does a urban heat island intensity portal, urban heat island severity map. Oh, geez. But there are freely available and publicly available data sets that you can use that will give you a snapshot of your urban heat island severity by neighborhood or in your city. Then there are things like the Weather Underground network, or joining one of those kind of meteorological websites like the Weather Bug or the Weather Underground. Those have accepted weather stations that aren't part of the kind of like NOAA observational network, but nonetheless you can see your city's heat distribution from those kind of fixed weather station sites. Then there are things a little bit more complicated, like iButtons, which is a little bit more of a sophisticated but still low cost sensor that you can affix to trees, lampposts, bus stops, all of those sorts of things, and retrieve the data in the form of like an SD card. So there's kind of a variety of different ways. If you're interested in figuring out, Michael, like an option that fits a budget that you might have, or a funding opportunity that you might have, reach out, and I'm happy to familiarize you with some of those options that you have for your jurisdiction.
Thank you.
If I could, I just wanted to respond to something Jeremy said in the last discussion. Let's see if I can share my screen. Again, I got to move it. I seem to have a hard time. Everything.
You can see a photo. It's got cars parked between trees.
All right, you can see that. Yeah. I just want to say, if you've had the luck to be able to travel to Europe, I mean, European cities just seems like a better job than we do. They plant trees everywhere. They're not so concerned about having. We'd love to have a lot of good soil for trees, but if you plant things like London planes and willow oaks, trees can survive in a little bit of soil. This is a parking lot in France, and it's a forest. It's literally a forest of plane trees, and the cars just park right among them. Now, American engineers would have a fit, doing that, if you can see that a little better. But there are ways you can plant trees and get rid of and shade hard surfaces. And so I just wanted to share one of my favorite pictures. So
thank you. We're just about out of time. In the minute we have left, do you each want to share a quick parting thought that you'd like to leave the audience with? Go ahead, Peggy.
You go first, Jeremy. I have a little more time to think.
Yeah, I was just going to say that just remembering that when you walk around your city or your neighborhood, recognizing how great of a privilege shade is in our neighborhoods and across our communities. It comparing the life of someone that wakes up in a hot house in a hot neighborhood to walk to the hot bus stop to go to a hot job versus people that wake up in a cooled house with a cooled car that they drive to a cooled office. The drastic difference of heat experience in our cities is directly tied to power and privilege. And reflecting on that, I think, is a really important personal thing to do.
That's great. I just say, think trees, plant trees, preserve trees. I think Richmond, and as I just said in the last one, you don't, for urban trees, that hardy trees that will survive in the city, you don't need a great amount of space. Richmond, I think, has to have 3 by 5 foot space for trees. Philadelphia, the urban forests are there, said the same thing. So if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to plant many trees. So tough urban trees can survive without a lot of soil. Even if they live 20 years, let's say you plant a tree that costs $400 and it lives 20 years or 40 years, that's a huge, just wonderful for your little $400.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to the attendees. Our next webinar is going to be on August 17th, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much, Peggy and Jeremy.
Thank you.